Hello and welcome back to Pin My Podfic. This will be the reading of After the Fall by innocent1 and underscore reader of chapter 11, part 3 and 4, finishing this chapter, Beneath the Guardian's Shadow. I am not in a good mood to be recording this, but the grind never ends, as they say. Chapter 11, Beneath the Guardian's Shadow, part 3. The cry of Dick echoed through the Batcave, vibrating against the cold stone and the silent monitors. The weight of Alfred's words still lingered in the air, like a mist too tense to disperse quickly, but the urgency in the young hero's hearts was stubborn, unyielding, as it had always been. Dick stepped forward, his gaze hard, his hands clenched into trembling fists. "We don't have time for this," he repeated, his voice steadier now, as if he were trying to convince himself as much as the others. His chest rose and fell rapidly, each breath a struggle not to drown inside his own urgency. Before the butler could reply, Wally surged ahead, his body leaning forward, vibrating with relentlessness, as though his energy no longer fit inside his skin. "There are people out there who need help," he exclaimed, and it seemed as though his every breath wanted to race ahead of his words. An impatient tremor ran through his legs, like he was a heartbeat away from bolting. Midoriya lifted his face slowly, and for a moment his silence was louder than any shout. His eyes gleamed not with fury, but with something rarer, a conviction almost innocent, almost pure. "To sacrifice oneself is a hero's duty," he said without raising his tone. It was as though he were simply stating a law of nature. There was no challenge, no hesitation, only certainty. Roy, who had remained silent until then, crossed his arms, his shoulders rigid like forged steel. When he finally spoke, there was no warmth in his voice, only the merciless cold of a blade. "Protecting people is the legacy we were left with." His eyes narrowed toward Alfred, but they did not plead. They demanded. "No matter what happens, we have to move forward." It was a vow, not an opinion. Zatanna clutched her cloak tightly, her fingers trembling against the fabric, as though it were the only thing keeping her heart in place. When she raised her face, her voice came out broken, but her vulnerability only heightened her strength. "Being a hero is the legacy my father left me." She drew a deep breath, tears threatening to spill, glaring in her eyes. I can't give up." And then silence. The chorus had been formed. Each of them had spoken not only their arguments, but the reason they defined them. Ideals so deeply rooted they shaped not just their choices, but their very identities. Alfred listened to them all without moving a muscle more than necessary. His posture remained upright, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression unshaken. There was no judgment in his eyes, no disdain, only the patience of someone who had seen the same cycle repeat far too many times to believe youthful stubbornness could be conquered by mere words. He waited until silence fully settled, like dust after an explosion. Only then, without raising his voice or altering his tone, he spoke the words that would only end the confrontation. 20 minutes until dinner." The pause was brief but firm enough to halt any immediate protest. "Wash up, eat, and rest. Tomorrow, You may try to save the world again. Tonight, allow me to save you from yourselves." The declaration sounded more like an order than a suggestion. There was no room for negotiation. The authority with which Alfred delivered those words did not come from hidden power nor from superhuman abilities. It came from something far more solid, and therefore far more unyielding: experience, responsibility, and love. The young heroes, like soldiers hearing the call of a martial trumpet, began to stir, opening their mouths in simultaneous protest, voices overlapping with fragmented phrases. "But Alfred," Wally cried, "we need to—" Roy began. "We can't just—" said Hannah sad, already taking a step forward, but Alfred didn't wait for their protests. He gained strength. With precise, unhurried motion, he turned to the Batcave's central panel and, without even glancing at the young ones, entered the sequence of commands. The sound came suddenly, a brief hum, almost imperceptible, followed by absolute silence. The lights that had illuminated the platforms began to shut down one by one, plunging the cave into controlled dimness. The monitors went dark with a soft click. The back computer emitted a final beep and powered off. The communication system dropped. The walkways retracted. The blast doors closed automatically with a dry metallic snap. Everything, every system, every tool, every escape route shut down. Alfred turned then, his expression serene, almost parental, and completed the gesture with the unyielding calm of someone who cared and protected even against the will of those being protected. "Good evening, gentlemen and lady." And with that, he calmly began to descend the stairs leading to the manor. The group remained there, in the half-darkness of the Batcave, stunned, paralyzed, like soldiers who had just been told that, for the first time, they would not march into war. Chapter 11, Beneath the Guardian's Shadow, Part 4. The dry snap of the panel shutting down reverberated through the Batcave like a funeral toll, cutting through the air and leaving behind a void that seemed to pulse in its wake. Alfred said nothing more. He turned his hands, still clasped behind his back, like a general refusing to prolong a lost battle, and began climbing the stairs with the same calm, measured pace as always. Yet, in that instant, every step sounded like a hammer, nailing shut the coffin of something they weren't sure could ever be recovered. The silence left in Alfred's wake weighed heavier than any order. None of them dared to follow him immediately. Wally was the first to crack, grumbling. "Seriously? We can't fight armies of aliens, but we can't argue with a butler?" Roy scoffed. Punching the nearest wall, the sound rang sharp in the cavern's gloom. "He's not just a butler," he said, his voice trembling with restrained anger. Zatanna let out a long sigh as though she already knew the battle was lost. "He never argues to lose," she murmured, folding her arms. None of them would admit it out loud, but the feeling was the same. They all felt like children caught in the middle of a mischief. Masked heroes, yes, but before Alfred, they were only young ones under the roof of a man who cared for them with an authority impossible to contest. The darkness around them seemed to seal the lesson. This was not the time to fight, not the time to argue. It was the time to accept. The main lighting was dead, only the emergency lights, strategically placed, still glowed, casting long shadows across the uneven walls of the back cave, twisting their silhouettes into silent specters. Dick's gaze drifted to the Zeta tube, now useless, its small red light showing what the system was down. The same tube that had carried him countless times between missions, pulled him out of danger, that had been the thin line between here or out there. He alone made no attempt to speak. Deep down, he knew it was pointless, not against Alfred, but there was more, somewhere inside. He felt the butler was right. The memory of Bruce cut through him like a shadow. How many times had he watched Batman work through the night without a pause, as though his body were nothing more than a machine serving the mission? How many times had Dick himself been dragged into that same relentless rhythm, believing that the rest was to show weakness? And yet, there was Alfred, enforcing silence and rest not as concessions, but as orders, as if to say, "The war isn't yours alone, boy." Dick drew in a long breath, looking at his friends, tense, frustrated, eager to go back to the fight. Perhaps it felt to him to understand that was trying to show Alfred was trying to show. Perhaps leadership wasn't only about knowing when to act, but also when to stop. And now he repeated the same gesture, a cycle that would not break. Dick lowered his head, letting out a quiet sigh as the shadows around him swallowed him. Beside him, Wally fidgeted with his communicator, turning the useless bracelet over and over between his fingers, restless and fast, until he realized it wouldn't work. It was shut down. He stopped, inhaled deeply, and for an instant his expression lost that electric spark he always carried. His face emptied, distant. What if he called her? The thought pierced him like an arrow out of nowhere. Iris. She had called the manor earlier, desperate for news. What if instead of always running from everything into speed, he simply called her? He told himself he couldn't. There was no time. But now, with everything shut down, standing still, would he have the courage? Wally closed his eyes and let his arm fall to his side, resigned, not even trying to press the communicator again. Away from the others, Midoriya stood, with his eyes fixed on the stone floor, the emergency lights faintly reflecting against the damp surface of his fist. His fist was clenched tight, as though he were crushing the very instinct that had always driven him forward. His mind pulled him far away to the streets of Mustafa, to that night between exhausted and broken. He tried to leave UA, believing it was better to face everything alone, to sacrifice himself for everyone, even at the cost of his own life. And All Might chasing after him, begging him to stop, trying to make him understand that even heroes needed to rest, to retreat, to live. But he hadn't listened back then, and now, once more, here he stood, fist tight, knees ready to run, yet the world around him shut, forcing him still. Midoriya exhaled slowly, opening his hand, finger by finger, as if each one breaking free was a piece of resistance giving away. Further back, Roy and Zatanna exchanged a silent look, unspoken, understanding, born not of victory, but of sheer frustration. Roy leaned against one of the metallic pillars, supporting the cave's upper structure. His arms crossed, his ardent eyes seemed fixed on some distant point. But in truth, they dragged him back to another time, another place. Dinah. She and Oliver arguing, always the same refrain. You need to stop. You need to rest. And Oliver, stubborn so much like him, answering like the same with that same cold stare Roy now saw reflected in himself. How many times had Dinah tried to make them understand? How many times had they ignored her? Roy squeezed his forearm, as if he could grasp the past and reshape it, but he knew it was far too late. Satana lowered her eyes, staring at her own feet, before swallowing her mind to drift back to another time. Giovanni Zatara, her father. So many nights. He practiced spells until late, pushing herself past her limits, and would always come into her room, place a firm hand on her shoulder, and say with the gentle accent, "Enough, daughter. Magic needs rest too." And she never listened until time ran out, just like now. She took a deep breath, blinking hard to keep the tears at bay, before raising her gaze again and meeting Roy's eyes. No words were needed. They both understood. The silence that now filled the Batcave was dense, heavy, as though the stone walls and ceiling had pressed even closer around them, smothering whatever fragments of resistance still remained. Finally, after long minutes in which no one dared to shatter that void, Dick lifted his eyes again, staring at the dead Zeta-2 panel, and let out a bitter half-smile, murmuring more to himself than to the others. I should have expected something like this from Alfred. The words lingered in the air, like a seal closing the night for good. No one replied. They didn't need to. And that was the end of chapter 11, Beneath the Guardian's Shadow. And this is an author's note from the original author on the AO3. It says, "Hello everyone, another chapter finished. I know it might feel like I'm stepping on expectations of those waiting for these heroes to become the new symbol of this world. In a way, I am, but for a valid reason. They're too young. Robin is 13 years old, Deku is 16, Kid Flash is 15, Red Arrow 18, the oldest, and Zatanna is 14. They are far too young to truly be heroes. Alfred knows it. That's why it's not time for action yet. That moment will come, but not while these characters are still in denial about their grief." And I agree. And this is why this work has multiple. This is literally a work in the series called Knights of Tomorrow. So I guess, yeah. So yeah, and the next chapter, the Alfred one. So yeah, that's it. Check them out on AO3, Innocent with an underscore reader. And yeah, link will be in the description. Also, the author's account will also be in the description as always. So yeah, bye.